Chapter 11. On the Foreign Exchanges. 1. In the preceding chapters we had given a sketch of the mechanism of the internal commerce of the country. We must now give a very brief outline of its external commerce, which is comprehended under the title of the foreign exchanges. There is of course no difference in principle between the two, because the principles of commerce are uniform throughout the world, but there is somewhat more complication in the details, because nations use different systems of coinage, and they establish artificial barriers between their mutual intercourse. On the meaning of an exchange. 2. An exchange in commerce is where a person pays his creditor by transferring to him a debt due to himself from someone else. When a person pays a debt by a banknote, or a check on his banker, it is an exchange. It is an example of novatio. 2 passengers are traveling in an omnibus. The fare is 6d. One passenger pays the conductor a shilling. The conductor is then indebted to him in 6d. The other passenger has a 6d in his hand ready to pay his fare. The conductor by a nod tells him to give the 6d to the first passenger. The whole transaction is an exchange. 3 parties and 2 debts are thus necessary to an exchange. The exchange is that branch of commerce which treats of the remission and settlement of debts between different places by paper documents, and the exchange of the money of one country for that of another. The state of the exchanges depends upon 2 distinct things: 1. The state of the monies of the different countries, and secondly, the state of commercial dealings between the countries. The state of the exchanges which depends upon the monies of the countries is called the nominal exchange. The state of the exchanges which depends upon the commercial dealings between the countries is called the real or commercial exchange. On the nominal exchange. 3. Suppose that the coinages of 2 countries are of the same metal, and that the coinage of one country is taken as the standard, then the quantity of the coin of the other, which contains exactly the same quantity of pure metal, is called the power of exchange between the 2 countries. Suppose that the exchanges between England and France were estimated in gold. There is as near as possible 1/4 more gold in an English sovereign than in the French Napoleon, or 20-franc piece. If the English coinage were taken as the standard, it would be equal to 1.25 Napoleon, anno 1. 25 would be called the power of exchange between England and France. The French exchanges are, however, expressed in francs, which are silver coins. If the sovereign contained exactly 1/4 more gold than the Napoleon, we should say that 25 was the power of exchange. If from any cause whatever the English coinage became degraded, worn, or clipped, sovereigns would not buy so many francs as if they were of full weight. If they were in a very bad state they might perhaps only buy 22 francs. And this would be called a fall in the foreign exchanges. Or if an English merchant was bound to pay 2,500 f to his creditor in Paris, he would have to give more than fool to buy the 2,500 f. In this point of view the exchange would be said to have risen so much % against England by the amount of that difference. If the coinage is in a depreciated state a merchant can buy a less amount of foreign coin with it. That is called a fall in the foreign exchanges. If he wants to buy a fixed amount of foreign coin he must give more of the depreciated coin than he would have to give if it were of full weight. That is called a rise in the foreign exchanges. These 2 expressions mean the same thing. It is evident that this adverse state of the exchanges will continue so long as the English coinage remains depreciated, and that the restoration of the coinage to its proper state will at once rectify the exchanges. It is only between countries which use the same metal as their standard that there can be a fixed power of exchange. If they use different metals, such as gold and silver, the relative value of these metals constantly varies in the market of the world, like that of any other 2 commodities, and it is no more possible to have a fixed price of one in terms of the other than to have a fixed legal price of wheat. The only correct way is to speak of the usual rate of exchange between them. England uses gold and France uses silver as I standard, consequently there can be no fixed power of exchange between them. On the real or commercial exchange. 4. We now have to consider the state of the exchanges arising from the commercial transactions of the country. Inland exchange. We will now show how an exchange is exemplified in practice. Suppose 2 cities, London and Edinburgh. Suppose a trader A in London is debtor to B in Edinburgh, and suppose that B in Edinburgh is also indebted to in London. Then A sends B an order upon B', B pays the amount to A, and the claims between the parties are settled. This is exactly similar to a person paying his creditor in the same town by giving him a check on his banker. This is an example of an exchange with 3 parties. As an example of an exchange with 4 parties, suppose that A in London owes B in Edinburgh a certain sum, and that B in Edinburgh owes A in London the same sum. Then A in London pays the amount to A', and receives from him an order on B for his debt. A then sends this order to B, who presents it to B', and receives the money from him. Thus the whole debts between the parties are settled by making payments in the same town instead of sending the money to pay both debts from one town to the other. When the debts between London and Edinburgh are exactly equal, they may all be discharged without sending any specie. The exchanges are then said to be at par. Supposing that the debts are not equal, and that Edinburgh wishes to send more money to London than it has to receive, then the demand for bills is greater than the supply, and as everyone would rather send a bill than cash, as it is cheaper to do so, those who had to send money would bid against each other for the bills in the basket, as for any merchandise, and the price of them would rise, as a premium would have to be paid for a bill on London. As a matter of fact, there is always a greater amount of money seeking to flow from the country to London than the contrary. Consequently, the demand for bills on London in the country is greater than the supply, and therefore inland bills upon London are always at a premium. This premium is computed by time. If a person in Edinburgh wants a bill at sight on London, he must pay 1 shilling per cent, or 4 days interest. This is called the time par of exchange between Edinburgh and London. There is a similar premium on bills, or par of exchange, between all other towns in the country on London. This is called inland exchange. The exchange of the country upon London is said to be in favour of London and against the country. But it is only unfavourable to those who wish to send money, or to those who wish to buy bills. It is equally favourable to those who have to receive money, or to the sellers of bills. From this example it appears that when bills in one place upon another are at a premium, the exchanges are adverse to the first place, because it has more money to pay than it has to receive, and the demand for bills is greater than the supply. On the contrary, when the first place has more money to receive than to pay, bills upon the second place will be at a discount, because the supply of bills is greater than the demand. On the limits of the variations of the exchanges, 5. Hence the price of bills to those who have money to send will be at a premium or a discount, according as there is more money to be sent away or to be received. But the premium cannot rise higher than the cost of sending bullion, because if it did so, persons would prefer to send the bullion itself. For the same reason the discount can never fall below the cost of sending bullion. Consequently, the variation of the exchanges are restricted to the limits of twice the cost of transmitting bullion between the two places. These limits of the rate of exchange are called specie points, because when the exchanges reach them, specie may be expected to flow in or out, as the case may be. On foreign exchange. 6. The principle of foreign exchange is exactly the same as that of inland exchange, only it is somewhat more complicated, as it involves the exchanges of the monies of the different countries. In exchange between two places, the money of one country is always taken as fixed, and the exchange is reckoned in the variable quantities of the money of the other country given for it. The former is called the fixed or certain price, and the latter the variable or uncertain price. Between London and Paris the L. sterling is the fixed price, and the variable sum is reckoned in francs and cents given for it. On the contrary, between London and Spain the Spanish dollar is the fixed price, and the variable sum is reckoned in the number of pence which are given for it. When a certain place is taken as a centre, if the fixed price is the money of that place, it is said to receive the variable price. On the contrary, when the money of that place is the variable price, it is said to give the variable price. Thus London receives from Paris so many francs and cents for the L. sterling, and London gives Spain so many pence for the dollar. The principle of the exchange between London and foreign places is of course exactly the same as the exchange between London and Edinburgh. When the exchanges are against London, foreign bills will be at a premium. When they are in favour of London, they will be at a discount. But there is very great complication in the details, because London receives the variable price from some places, and gives it to others. Consequently, the expressions will have to be reversed according as they are applied to these different places. For instance, between London and Paris, If the exchanges against London and bills upon Paris rise to a premium, the L. Sterling will purchase fewer francs, and therefore the rate of exchange will fall below par. But when the exchange is favorable to London, and therefore bills upon Paris at a discount, the L. Sterling will purchase more francs, and consequently the rate of exchange will rise above par. And the same is true of all places from which London receives the variable price. But the case is exactly the reverse with respect to all places to which London gives the variable price. On exchange operations. 7. Exchange operations consist in buying, selling, importing, and exporting bullion, called bullion operations, and buying and selling bills, called banking operations. It may happen from various causes that it may be more profitable to possess bullion at one place than at another. Whenever this is the case, exchange operators export bullion from one place to the other for the sake of the profit. They create bills upon such a place. They draw upon their correspondents, discount their bills, and remit the proceeds to meet their drafts. When you suppose, for example, that the rate of discount was 2% in London and 6% in Paris, that would mean that a bullion merchant could buy gold in London for 2% and sell it in Paris at 6%. It would be just as if farmers in England were to sell their wheat at 405 a quarter when the price of wheat in Paris was 8 os a quarter. The consequence of this would be clear. The corn dealers would buy up all the corn they could in England and export it to Paris. And this drain of wheat would go on until the price of it in England had risen to such a price as to destroy the profit of the operation. It is exactly the same with bullion. So long as English bankers sell their gold at 2%, while the price is 6%, in Paris, bullion dealers will buy as much gold as they can to send it over to Paris, and the only way to stop this is by destroying the profit. That is, English bankers must raise the price of their gold, or raise the rate of discount. 8. We will now take a very simple example to illustrate the general nature of the operations which influence the movements of bullion. Suppose an English merchant sends 1,000 litres worth of goods to Bordeaux. His agent there would have to consider whether it would be more advantageous to send back the proceeds of the goods in money, or in some native product. The principal native product of Bordeaux is wine, and whether the agent should send his principal wine or not would depend on the price of the wine at Bordeaux and in London. If from any reason the price of wine happened to be very low in London and high at Bordeaux, he would not send wine, and if there were no other native product he would have to send specie. If Bordeaux had only one native product, wine, the chances of finding the markets both at Bordeaux and London in a favorable state for importing produce would be limited to that single article. If it had other products, the chances would be increased of finding products to suit the markets, and the chances would evidently be multiplied according to the number and variety of its products. Hence is seen the great importance of having as great a variety as possible of products in a market, because the more chances there are that commercial indebtedness may be settled by products rather than by specie. Specie is always the most unprofitable article of commerce between countries, because the charges for its transport must be paid out of itself, and cannot be added to its price, as those of merchandise are. The price of merchandise also is always enhanced in the usual course of trade as it passes through the hands of successive dealers. Hence the transmission of bullion from country to country always shows that the export of products has become unprofitable. From this also we see that the scarcity and dearness of native products is an infallible cause of the export of specie from a country. On the contrary, an abundant supply of products, both domestic and foreign, is a certain cause of its import into a country, as people flock to buy in a well-stocked and cheap market. When a great and unexpected dearth of some object of prime necessity occurs in England, such as the failure of the potato crop or the harvest, its price rises enormously high, and the infallible result is to cause a great export of specie for the time being, because our necessity for food is much more pressing and immediate than the necessity of foreign countries for our goods, or their capability of purchasing them. And the only way to arrest such a drain is to effect such a reduction in the price of British goods as to make it more profitable to export goods than specie. It has already been shown that credit has the same effect on prices as money, and in cases of a great crisis the effects of credit are often very mischievous by sustaining the price of home produce at such a level as to prevent its export. In such times there is a great danger of an excessive quantity of specie being exported, so as to endanger the whole structure of our system of credit. The object of the Bank Act of 1844 is to cause such a reduction of the amount of credit in circulation at such periods as to prevent a dangerous drain of specie. Suppose also that, in consequence of some miscalculations and erroneous expectations, our merchants have so overstocked the markets with our goods that their price has fallen so low as to cause a loss. This is called overtrading. When this is the case it would obviously be absurd to export more goods to incur further losses. The consequence is that nothing but specie will go to buy goods in that market. Hence also we see that overtrading is a sure cause of a drain of bullion from the country. Overtrading and a failure of the cereal crops of this country are each of them sure causes of a drain of bullion. The most disastrous event for the commerce of this country is when both these circumstances happen simultaneously. It is like a spring tide of disaster. The great monetary panic of 1847 was brought on by several years of overtrading, followed by successive failures of the staple food of the people of England and Ireland. On foreign loans, securities, and remittances as affecting the exchanges. 9. Foreign loans, public securities, bonds of commercial companies, now form a regular article of import and export between countries, and affect the exchanges exactly like any other article of merchandise. Bills of exchange and the drafts of private families also have greatly increased in recent times. But as all these pass through the post office, and not through the custom house, it is impossible to ascertain their amount. Hence the subject of the foreign exchanges is an insoluble puzzle to any persons who look only at the official return of merchandise published by the Board of Trade, on monetary and political convulsions as affecting the exchanges. 10. Monetary and political convulsions in our modern artificial state turn the exchanges in favor of a country, unless this effect is prevented by the issue of inconvertible paper. Such convulsions are always attended by a great destruction of credit, which while it existed performed the function of money. As soon as this credit is destroyed there is an intense demand for money. Money, therefore, rises immensely in value, both with regard to goods and debts, and it immediately begins to flow in from neighboring countries. In 1799 there was a great commercial crisis at Hamburg. Discount rose to 15%. That immediately drained bullion from England. In 1825 the bank, by a long series of overissues, had turned the foreign exchanges against the country. But as soon as the great panic set in the foreign exchanges turned in favor of the country. The same thing happened in 1847, and in innumerable other instances. On the means of correcting an adverse exchange. 11. There are, then, three great economic quantities, products, bullion, and debts, all seeking to be exchanged, all flowing from where they are cheaper to where they are dearer. But all this mighty mass of credit is based upon bullion, and if the bullion is suffered to ebb away too rapidly the whole superstructure is endangered, and then follows one of those dreadful calamities, a monetary crisis. If an adverse state of the exchange is caused by a depreciated currency, there is no cure but a restoration of the currency to its proper state. If it is caused by commercial indebtedness there are only two methods of correcting it: an export of produce and a rise in the rate of discount. It is sometimes alleged that an adverse state of the exchange is itself an inducement to export, on account of the premium at which the bills can be sold. But a very much more certain means of producing an export is the lowering of their price. A difference in the rate of discount between two countries more than sufficient to pay for the transmission of bullion will produce a flow of bullion from one to the other. But as the cost of transmission falls on the operator, the difference requires to be more considerable than might appear at first sight. And if the bills be at 3 months, the profit will be only 1/4 of the apparent difference. Thus Mr. Goshen says that there must be a difference of 2% between London and Paris to attract gold from one to the other. But whatever the difference may be, the method is absolutely certain. Directly the rate of discount is raised here, traders cease to export bullion, they begin to import it, and continental bankers and brokers increase their demand for English bills. As the rate rises the demand will increase, until at last the price reaches the specie point, and gold begins to flow in, until the necessary equilibrium is restored between bullion and credit. We thus see what an extremely complicated subject the foreign exchanges is, because all these different causes may be acting in all sorts of different ways in conjunction or opposition, and of course it requires an intimate knowledge of commercial affairs at any particular time to discern how each is operating. This must suffice here for a general outline of the subject.